please write in the chat. All right. Thank you, everybody, for joining this capacity building session. And thanks for the Environmental Law Working Group for their efforts in organizing these capacity building sessions. First of all, I am Assel Abotalib. I am from Yemen, a master student at the Free University of Amsterdam, studying Master of Environmental Resource Management, specializing in energy and climate. I'm a member of several youth organizations, including the Major Group, to UNAP, to UN Youngo, and I am the founder of the Global Youth and Sustainability Organization. Before we start, I will give you a quick overview of what we're going to talk about in this session. I'm going to touch on a little bit about the background of the agreement and a little bit of history before what was there before this agreement. And then we will talk about the agreement itself and then discuss about how effective is it and are we in the right path? And then we will open the floor for the question and answer session at the end. Okay, so to start with, Paris Agreement is considered to be one of the most inclusive agreements in relation to the climate change. We started with the Kyoto Protocol, and that the differences between Paris Agreement and Kyoto Protocol is very important to know. The goal in Kyoto Protocol was to reduce the greenhouse gases emissions to 5.2 below the 1990 levels, but it was mainly focusing on developed countries, that countries which were considered as industrialized by 1997. Hence, there were a lot of challenges in the progress of Kyoto Protocol, including the absence of major emitters because they used to take an advantage of their status as developing countries. Also, the absence of the United States involvement in the protocol. Moving forward, by 2015, in the Conference of Parties number 21 to the United Nations Framework of Climate Change, and all countries decided on coming up with more inclusive, more flexible agreements, which is non-legally binding, but it works in the mechanism of voluntary pledge from countries, where each country will give their nationally determined contributions to tackle and address the climate change. And then they would have the flexibility to adjust their plans, and the motivation would work through member states putting pressure on each other to work on more commitment with the inclusivity of all countries from global south and the global north, and for addressing all kind of greenhouse gases, not only targeted. And it had the framework starting from 2015 until 2030, but most goals initially was set to be achieved by 2025 to 2030. Okay, so the agreement itself, there were a lot of discussions before adopting the agreement, where so many negotiations were by COP21 in terms of wordings, in terms of a lot of details. Hence, the negotiations in few articles are still going on, and the final formatting of the wordings of the Paris agreements was to set the goal of limiting the global warming below 2 degrees Celsius, and preferably to be 1.5. Okay, so the main elements of the agreement was to address the global temperature rise. And if you can see the first figure here by NASA, it shows how the global temperature were increased, especially since the mid of the last century, and how we are approaching 1.5. And this means we would have a lot of challenges, a lot of tipping points, and That's why we had the goal of limiting to 1.5 and below 2. The main elements of the agreement was to work in so many approaches, focusing on controlling the global temperature to below 2 degrees Celsius, working on financing mechanisms. And what we saw at the last COP was the first achievements in that by addressing the loss and damage funds. And also as part of the pledge from member states to the global agreements, developing countries and rich countries agreed to provide $100 billion from 2020 onwards to developing countries to support the climate change mitigations and solutions. Yet the funding mechanism is still not in progress as it was ambitious at the beginning. Also, we still facing challenging in terms of the adaptations, mitigations programs, and capacity buildings between developing and developed countries. Hence, the progress is still there. The question now, are we on the right track or not? I would refer to the recent publication by the IPCC, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, and their recently published report, which is IPCC report, synthesis report. As you can see in the graph in my slide, it's clearly showing that our progress is not even close to limiting the global warming to 2 degrees Celsius. Instead, our business as usual activities for now with implemented policies is leading us to a global temperature rise between 2.2 degrees Celsius to 3.5 under a medium confidence analysis. This means that we are not achieving Paris goal. We won't be able to achieve it by 2030. And unless all the countries, stakeholders, civil societies, everyone in the planet is working toward more ambitious commitments, more actions toward mitigating the climate change, we are in the path towards irreversible changes, a future that we are not clearly aware of what's going to happen. And this is affecting everyone on the planet, including the future generations. Hence, it's very important to work towards more ambitious. Since I talked about the ambitious, if we're going to see the agreement ambitions, it's clearly showing that we had initially the goal by limiting to achieve the 1.5 to 2 degrees Celsius range. We could have started way earlier than 2015, but since the start, we still did not have enough ambitious and commitment from member states. And that's why all the climate change negotiations, mid-year negotiation in Bonn, or the Conference of Parties, which is going to be in Dubai by the end of November this year, we really hope that it's going to be way better in terms of the commitment, in terms of countries putting pressures in each other, and also the role of youth to voice out these challenges. That was from me. I mean, it's very challenging to address Paris agreements within the time range for the capacity building, but I tried to touch on the most important points in relation to the agreements. If you have any question, feel free. We will stop the record. And